Hello and welcome to Risk Chats with AFERM. Today we'll be speaking with Nicole Puri, Risk Management Officer of the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, about their ERM program. Nicole, good morning. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, great. Well, I'm excited to hear all about what you do over at the PBGC, the risk management work you do over there. And I thought if you could start off by letting our listeners know kind of, what's unique about your agency and your role over there at your agency.
Sure. So I am the risk management officer at the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. And, one of the things actually that's unique about my position, and get into a little bit what I do as well, but one of the things that is unique is I was actually hired because of a congressional mandate. So there's very few, I think, agencies, maybe one other that I know of, where Congress actually said, hey, you need to actually hire a risk management officer. Right. And so what happened was that was in 2012, and the agency, after a new director came in, they brought me in. And at the time, because they knew enterprise risk management was coming through A123, they actually decided to go ahead and implement A123 enterprise risk management at the same time. So they wrote that into the job description. Oh, okay. So it's a little bit unique. So it was not so much that the agency was really burning and wanting to implement ERM, but they knew that there was that congressional mandate out there. But the director did embrace the concept, so that was a good part. Some of the things that I do, I chair our risk management council, probably one of the things I spend the most amount of time on. That council is made up of, I would say, mid-level executives, and so I spend a lot of time with them, helping them understand what we're trying to do with ERM to really, get their minds around what we need to do to be able to change the culture. Right. And that's a great group of people that I work with. And then in general, I lead the implementation of ERM. Right now what that means is we just implemented a risk assessment process that really involves all parts of the organization. So we really made sure to look at every part of the organization as we're identifying and then starting to mitigate those top risks. There were efforts before I got there that looked at risk, but it's much more holistic now. And we have a process to escalate those risks to the top, and that the senior executives have embraced that and have been working on trying to mitigate those. So that's been great. I collaborate with those senior executives on risk strategies and the framework for the agency, for the ERM for the agency, and that's gone pretty well. We've gotten a framework into place in the 18 or so months I've been there. And I spend a lot of time coordinating risk management activities across the corporation. So again, of course, there were risk management efforts going on before I got there. So we try to make them consistent and to have more of a corporate approach, make sure people know what the top corporate risks are as opposed to just the risks that they deal with, day to day, the more program level risks. I provide technical expertise on enterprise risk management. That has been fun and an interesting, I think something that's been a little bit new to them. So having somebody that they can go to for technical expertise, I think has provided a lot of value, especially on some areas like information technology, where they already have a lot of risk activities that they do, but they don't quite know how to integrate it with ERM. So I've been able to work with them on that. And another thing I do is assess and report on risk compliance. We use, of course, there are existing methodologies that we have, but I've also tried to bring in some new and innovative ideas, new strategies for them to look at. And then lastly, we have both an advisory committee and a board of directors, so I do report on risk to both of those organizations.
And how often do you all, do you report up, or what's the kind of frequency of meetings?
So our advisory committee meets every other month, and I have so far I've met with them twice, and they're starting to get more interested in it. So I expect that I probably won't talk to them every month, but maybe twice a year, 3 times a year, something like that. The board is a little different. We had a new board, of course, with the change in administration, new board of directors. Sure. Our board is the secretaries of Labor, Commerce, and Treasury, and then they designate sort of representatives. So those folks are busy,
Sure.
And sort of depending on who's in that position at any given time, there's more or less interest in different topics. And so I think right now you know, we're trying to ease into the idea of giving ERM reports, and so we'll see how that goes. But it's a new thing, so we don't have an established pattern yet. But I imagine at least once a year I'll be reporting to the board.
Okay. No, I just have some curiosity questions. We have some specific topics today, but I was just curious as far as the operations of your program. So similar to other agencies, I would guess you do have a risk profile, and you've developed all that as well? Or?
Yes, we have a risk profile. We just completed our second one, so we're in compliance. Exactly. And that has been an interesting process. They actually had started that. They had a concept of what their top risks were before I ever came on board.
Right. Makes sense,
yeah. And so what we've done is make sure that that process is comprehensive so that we're not missing anything.
Right.
And we've tried to then narrow down focus so that we make sure that my role is helping the corporation just look at what those top risks are, and also to mitigate. I think there's a good recognition that we need to spend more of our time on doing something about the risks than on just identifying them, which I think is, it's good, and it's perhaps a little unique to that agency. So.
Right. So do you feel coming in your role, you've been able to kind of help push some of that action? We need to, not just identify, but let's do something about this. Let's actively manage the risks.
Exactly. Yeah, that was one of my biggest focus areas. I really, I believe that if you're just identifying risk, you're not really adding a whole lot of value, honestly.
Yeah.
So I think that when you're spending time to reduce that risk or to take advantage of an opportunity that you see as a result of a risk, that's where you're really starting to add value, right? And that's where over time, executives will see that it's worth their time to invest in this process.
Right.
So that's always been a big focus of mine. And I think we have already started to see some results come out of that. We had one risk that we were looking at last year that had to do with one of our biggest programs and its ability to get data, use the data that it had, and just to sort of better wrap its arms around, how to improve that process in the future. And went out to OMB and said, hey, this is a risk and we need, we'd like some money to address it, and they agreed. And so certainly identifying it as a risk didn't hurt.
Absolutely. So. No, I mean, a lot of folks I've talked to, this is really becoming something very important for strategy and budget for sure. This is where we have major risk areas. We need to address these, and, funding goes with that, of course. So
exactly.
And this kind of delves into our first topic here, which is I really want to talk about kind of how you feel about the CRO's role in the organization. Should it be kind of an independent sort of position, or how would you characterize it for it to work best?
Yeah, so this is something that I have felt since I first started learning about enterprise risk management and what its role was in the organization, that it's really important that a chief risk officer, maintain some level of independence from really everything going on in the organization, whether you're reporting to a CFO or like a deputy secretary, or whatever it might be, whatever level you're reporting to, you need to maintain independence in that reporting. And I think a lot of people hear the word independence and they start to think, well, that's the IG, and it's not the same. Right. And I think, it's not exactly the same. There are differences because IGs usually either report directly to the head of an organization, or even in our case, actually, our IG reports to our board of directors. Right. So there's a little difference there in terms of how that works out. But I think the concept is similar, right? The IG should have independence so that they feel that they can always bring something to light that they believe is an issue. And when you think about what a chief risk officer does, it should be the same. If you, as a chief risk officer, are constrained by the politics of the organization, and you feel that you don't have the ability to talk freely about what's going on, you're kind of not really doing your job, right?
Exactly.
And so I I feel like that's really important. And it's harder for us, I think, sometimes, because when you have an internal role and you're working with people closely, trying to establish relationships so that people will trust you to talk in order to talk about risk and to do something about these risks, it becomes more difficult to sort of maintain that independence, right? Because you want to make sure people trust you, and I lost my train of thought. So at any rate, so that's what I think is important to maintain that independence, but it can be a little bit more difficult when you're in the internal role. So what's important, what you have to do, I think, when you're a chief risk officer, is to make sure you're always kind of coming back to what that vision is and what your role is in the organization, and always be reminding yourself that yes, there's probably going to be a lot of pushback in certain areas. Certain people don't want to change the way they do things. They don't want to rock the political boat. But if you don't do those things when they're needed, then you could be missing out on opportunities to move the organization forward.
Right, and I mean things that a lot of big risks in agencies are political risks, or things that aren't necessarily just a budget, or some things are perceptional, or how do folks see your agency? And I think if you can't get folks to talk about that and bring it out, then you're not really, like you said, doing your job as a risk officer. Yeah, I
mean, every day, senior executives are making decisions about shifting resources from here to there, what's a priority today and what isn't a priority. And they don't want to make those decisions public a lot of times, right? And which, certainly understandably, those are often sensitive, management decisions that if the public just randomly found out just pieces of information, could be difficult. And so, I think as chief risk officers, we of course have to be sensitive to that's not, the point isn't just to be completely open and transparent and, to not provide any context for what we do. So you have to walk a little bit of a line, but the point is to be honest with the people internally, right? I mean, when if you're reporting to your director or your secretary or deputy secretary, whoever it might be, that you are honest with them about what you see and let them make the final decision, as opposed to trying to hide the information or say, well, this person didn't want me to say that, or what have you.
Right. So did I understand correctly? Do you also support internal control work at the agency, or is that a different function?
Actually, we have a process that separates the two.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So.
No, because I was kind of thinking also from the independence aspect, sort of the internal audit function in a way has to be independent as well, right? The A123 folks. And then beyond that, you also kind of have a similar, you want to kind of keep independent as well. So,
right.
Yeah, it makes sense. Because, you want to be able to do, OIG really does try to, stay kind of separate, and kind of make the recommendations. But in, A123 as well as I think risk officers, it's sort of a hybrid role in a way, you're advising, but you're also kind of keeping that third party perspective too. So it's a unique challenge.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm lucky in that our folks who do have responsibility for the internal controls and, now just controls.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
Part of our work are very supportive of enterprise risk management. So, we have cross participation. Our director of internal controls sits on the Risk Management Council. I sit on our internal controls committee. And so we do spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about that interaction, although the responsibility for those two is separated. So it's a little, I don't think it's different, but it's, it's one approach. It seems to work for the agency though.
So, and remind me again, so what are your lines of reporting? Who do you report to?
Sure. So I report to the director of PBGC.
Okay.
So I sit in the office of the director technically, then that's an interesting whole subject in and of itself. Sure. It has pros and cons. And actually before I came to PBGC, I worked at HUD, and at HUD I was the deputy director for the Enterprise Risk Management Division, which was within Public and Indian Housing, which was a component of HUD. So it was several levels down from the secretary of HUD, obviously. And, so I have kind of firsthand experience with both approaches, right? Working sort of under the radar and then reporting, directly to the top person.
Right.
And I think both can work. Both have, again, pros and cons, pluses and minuses. I think in the case of PBGC, it's a small agency, so it's helpful to have the ear of the director. And so far, that seems to be working reasonably well.
Great. And I was just curious, what advice would you give other agencies? I mean, I know some, for example, some folks I've talked to, they have dual roles as a risk officer, but also, I mean, in some cases, a deputy financial officer or a management area, or different kind of dual roles. And I don't know if that's partly due to the size of the agency, or just they're trying to figure out how this role actually should work. What would you how would you recommend to folks out there?
So yeah, I think for many organizations, you make a good point in that perhaps if it's a small organization, they need to have somebody focused on two different areas. Right. And if you have the kind of buy-in of your management to move forward with ERM, I don't think it matters, whether you're filling two roles. I mean, as long as you can do both effectively, of course. Sure. But if you have the freedom to move forward with enterprise risk management and you're getting the support you need, that's wonderful. I think if you're in a position where the agency has decided to sort of group or sort of put enterprise risk management under the CFO or with internal controls because they think it's a financial function, that's more difficult.
Okay.
And that's where I think most of the people I know that are in roles like that are really passionate about ERM, and they believe that this is something that will make the organization better. And so they spend the time and the energy and the effort to convince their senior leadership and convince them that this is worthwhile and they should spend time on it and so forth.
Right.
I imagine there's people out there that don't, and that they may not be interested in this podcast, but no, I mean, I think that you can easily do both. I know people also that do strategic planning and performance and enterprise risk management. Right. So any of those things can be combined because they're all related. I think it'd be interesting to see somebody who's the budget director and does ERM and see how that works out.
Well, it's back to kind of your independent role, but also understanding of the bigger picture of the whole organization. You're not just looking at it from a financial viewpoint or a HR viewpoint, whatever it may be. So I think it's great where you are. You kind of have you're looking across truly the full enterprise, and you try to
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely key to this position, to be able to have that perspective. If you don't have the access or the ability, you have to have that information to be able to do your job effectively.
Okay. Well, speaking of which, so this kind of goes to our next area, as far as gaining the buy-in from the stakeholders throughout the organization, and how do you demonstrate, the value that ERM programs bringing to the agency?
Yeah, so value is one of those things that, man, it's a huge subject, and it is something that I think even in the private sector they still struggle with, and it's so much easier in the private sector because really everything comes down to cash flow, right?
Yep,
I mean, they're there to make money.
Right.
In the government, we don't have that. So how do you show value? Everybody has a different definition, and so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this because I think it's not only an interesting topic, but one that is going to make or break enterprise risk management in the long run in the federal government. Yeah. So, I think that, one of the biggest questions is, how do you do it, right? I think we all you can think about what is value to my organization, and you probably have a pretty good idea. You can name a couple of things off the bat that the organization values, but how do you actually do it? And there's really no magic answer. I think that's the reason why probably we haven't, as a community, spent a lot of time documenting and thinking about this, because it's not like there's going to be one answer that fits every agency. It's just not going to be that way.
Right.
So, I think what you have to do is to actually take that time to dig down into your own agency and come up with the answers, very individualized answers. And when you think about these things, it also has to be something that has longevity? How do you span administrations?
Right.
To the extent that you can. I mean, you may not always be able to. We have had, there's been a major paradigm shift recently. It may be hard in some agencies to do that. But then again, there's some things that are really long-term problems, challenges, risks that we face across government that we may be able to, if we can add value in those areas, that would span across administrations, like staffing and, IT, technology modernization, things like that. So, what I've done personally is started looking at a model for enterprise risk management that gets away from the kind of sort of simplistic view of looking at probability and impact, which is a great place to start. I actually think it's fine to start there. There's nothing wrong with it. But it doesn't give you the precision, I think, that you need. And it also doesn't always, it doesn't help you focus in enough on where the value is. So it's just a very generic look, right? And if you're not well trained, if you're not sort of really, able to tune in to what the true risks are to the mission of the organization, then that approach probably, it's only somewhat effective. It's not going to get you to 100% or, as effective as it could be. So anyway, what I've started to do is to look at a model that will combine actually getting away from a strategic plan and just looking at value. What is the organization value? And can we come up with some metrics that would measure that value?
Right.
So, for instance, one of the things that we looked at or that I would like to look at is how much we spend in legal fees and how much we get in return for that. Right, so our organization spends a fair amount in not only internally on lawyers, but also we have outside counsel. But we get a lot of value out of that because we are able to recover money that pension plans or individual employers might have put towards something else and not put into the pension plan, and we're able to get that money back. In our case, it's for the corporation, right? It's for the benefits that we have to pay out to for our own obligations. But the concept is the same. So, if we have a pretty good ratio there and we can justify the legal fees, then that may be an area where that really adds value and that we can demonstrate adds value through that metric.
Right.
And there's other things too. Another one that we that could perhaps be used at PBGC would be like keeping down the number of audit findings. To PBGC, that's really an important thing, is to try to keep audit findings under control. And we already spend a lot of time and effort on that. So a metric that showed the amount of time and effort that we spend and really put that up as a value driver for PBGC, I think would be an interesting place to start, right? So you take these value drivers, the way this model works is you take these value drivers and you have some measurement of them, and then you go out and you talk to the subject matter experts, just like you would do, I think, in any risk assessment process. You talk to those folks who know it and say, what is it that's going to prevent you from being able to meet this? Or, what opportunities would you have, again, the risks. But then the next part is where it changes from what we do now. So then you take that information and you develop deterministic scenarios that look at not only one of those events occurring, but also perhaps multiples of those events. So you can now, once you have this model done with this deterministic scenarios in it, you can actually quantify what your risk is going to be of either one event or multiple events occurring.
Right.
And it becomes more precise. It assigns a better quantitative number, right? So instead of just saying 1 to 5, we're really somewhat guessing, which is okay to start with again. But I think as you get more sophisticated with this, you want a more precise answer and you want to really focus in on what those risks are. So that's overall, that model works with a value-driven approach. And so that's something that I'm really interested in doing. I think it works. It's an adaptation from what is done in the private sector. Some organizations do it. It's a specific approach. but it can work for the public sector if you can identify what those value drivers are.
Right.
And again, and so this is why it's hard to apply it across government in general, because you have to do the work to your own agency.
The approach makes sense across, regardless, right? The approach makes sense. So, but what is value for a different organization, of course?
Exactly.
That's what's going to vary.
Right. Yeah. Even if you didn't have approach, I mean, even if you chose not to employ this model, but you just said, let's look at what our value drivers are,
right?
Or what
exactly.
do we, for all the things that we spend money on or put our resources and time into, what are we getting value out?
Right.
And are those the right, is that what's important to us? And this can be difficult conversations to have if you're not used to doing it, but
right.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of agencies, they have whole programs just for that. This is specific value we're supposed to get for this grant or this loan or this whatever it may be. And
I think it helps if you are a large agency and you're already required to report under GIPRAMA, because PBGC is not. We're a small agency, so we're exempted from the strategic review process, and that it makes it a little more difficult because you have to go a couple steps back and convince people that it's even worth it to set performance measures at all.
Yeah.
But I think at least if you can say, this is what, you clearly value this particular area because you're putting time and effort into it, and as long as the rest of the senior executives in the corporation agree, then that may be a good place to go, as opposed to trying to point to something esoteric in a strategic plan that they may not, they say, yeah, we have to have that, but it's perhaps not, really representative of what we think is important.
Right, exactly. No, I love that approach. So, and then you said this is something you have started doing to some degree, or you're going to get more deeply into it?
Yeah, so we're looking into it. There's still groundwork for us to do in terms of, convincing senior leadership that this is a good approach and it's worth spending money on. I don't have any staff really, so it's not something that I can implement on my own. So if we move forward, or we'll be moving forward with support and help to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I have one more question for you today, and really was curious about how you feel the interaction between the CRO and the IG. What's a good relationship there, or especially for you guys, what's kind of the relationship there?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm really lucky. I have an Inspector General who is a huge supporter of ERM, and I think most people probably know that in our industry. He's been there since before I came, so. I think what is important in having a relationship with your IG is whether you're on the same page about the role that each of you play, right? So in essence, our roles are very similar, but our approach and our toolbox is what's different.
Right.
So if you are working with an Inspector General who agrees that their role is to help make the organization better, then they should be open to enterprise risk management as a concept, right? If you're working with an IG who, is about cranking out audit findings, it's going to be much more difficult.
Right.
But I think what's great is that we now have IGs out, in the world who are saying, hey, this is what ERM can bring to the table for an Inspector General. This is why it's beneficial, and this is why you should embrace it.
Right.
And so other IGs then can see that, oh, okay, this is not a threat to me. It's something that will actually, support everybody's work and support making government better in general. And so I think that's the path to sort of a better relationship between Inspectors General and the business.
Right.
And so, again, I'm lucky because I had that going in. So I didn't have to overcome all of that. I just had it. And then we work from the point of, we understand that we're both here to do the same thing. But we don't, I wouldn't say that we get together and collaborate or, anything like that. It's not the type of relationship where, we're working closely together. Our IG reviews his information independently. He determines what he thinks is important, what's risky for the corporation. He's been very good about looking to get more information where he doesn't have enough. So he will go to the folks on the business side and say, I'd like to learn more about what you do so that I can provide better, monitoring or audit of those things, and make sure that I'm also focusing on the riskiest areas. He said, but without any information, I just assume you're risky. So that's I think been an effective approach at PBGC, where people have said, yeah, okay, I would rather that you have the right information and that you help me to reduce my risks or to better identify my risks or whatever it might be. And so that's been pretty successful. And so again, perhaps that's, a good model, for others to follow. And in terms of how that has affected our relationship, it's between myself and my Inspector General. I just think it has continued to make it more positive. It really supports what I do, because I'm also trying to get our senior executives to better understand what their risks are and to take as open-minded of an approach as possible, and to recognize that sharing information and perhaps a bit more transparency is generally helpful to trying to achieve their goals.
Right.
And so it has worked well, and so we've been able to, I think, take more steps towards that than maybe others have. So I like to think we're leading the way a little bit on that. But overall, yeah, it's a good relationship, and I think it's one that if you get to experience it, it's actually really helpful in terms of being a chief risk officer.
Great. No, and I used to work in the IG early in my career, and with one of in our agency, I know for sure if the ERM would have been around, we would have been our IG happy, because they, at least it would show that different programs, different areas, they're actually considering what are our risks and proactively doing something about it, and even trying to, to take some actions on them proactively. And that was, some places that did that, that made our job a lot easier.
Yep.
And, so I think IGs ideally would be hoping that agencies are embracing risk management.
Yes.
So
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Nicole, thank you very much for joining us today. I think we learned a lot, and appreciate taking your time. So again, thanks, and good luck in moving forward over at the PBGC.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Well, that's our show. Thanks again for tuning in. You can find us on AFERM.org, and you can provide us some suggestions for guests that you'd like to hear on the podcast. So we'd like to hear from you, and until the next one, this is Paul Marshall signing out for Risk Chats with AFERM.